All I Wanted Was You. Written by Captain Rivani. Read by Arashi. Dorothea doesn't know when it starts exactly, but at one war meeting, she notices the way Petra leans forward, her chin in the palm of her hand, and her eyes laser-focused at the map of Faerghus territory that Hubert pinned to the board. She sees the locked jaw, the delicate hairs that cover Petra's dark skin, how it leads to her magenta hair, and the way her lips pout together when she concentrates. Next to her, Edelgard coughs and gives her a stern look that works like a bucket of cold water to the face. Dorothea sits up a little straighter, feeling a little more flushed, and going even redder when Caspar, the caring idiot, asks if she's feeling well. "Quite well, thank you." They get back to the meeting, and she meets Petra's eyes for half a moment. She looks concerned, but there is a soft, searching smile that makes Dorothea's whole body thrum with something that she thought the war had killed. She zones in on the numerous equations, zones, and strategies that Hubert's talking them through, seeing but not hearing. All she thinks is, oh no. Petra is the sun personified, and even Edelgard can't match her strength on the battlefield, the way she ducks and weaves past enemy lines and leaves them cut to ribbons, her sword red and pink with blood and left behind gore. The war is a disgusting, cruel thing, but Petra makes her believe it's beautiful, if only for a moment, just by being whole. She often finds the Brigid princess after battle, taking an equal amount of care to her blades and the minimal injuries that adorn her body. Once, a particularly desperate thought enters her, born by Petra looking up and discovering her. She wonders, suddenly feeling like she needs to lie down, if Petra would pay her body that same amount of attention if she knelt down and kissed her. It doesn't help that the other woman brightens at her appearance and talks with such enthusiasm that Dorothea finds herself wanting even harder than before. Later, she finds herself back in her room and sat at her vanity, fingers tapping out a frantic rhythm. "What is wrong with you?" she asks her reflection, and sees then how ugly she is. She is beauty personified on the surface, of course. Anyone with eyes would be able to tell that. Her alabaster skin, the emerald green of her eyes, and the curves that attract both men and women's eyes whenever she walks into a room. She had it all planned out. Find someone with money, get married, have little babies if that suited them, and live until she couldn't anymore. She's discussed this with Petra back during their days at the academy, elbows pressed together as they lay at the bottom of her bed, talking and talking until they were too tired to continue. Dorothea looks at her reflection, all wide-eyed and frenzied, and finds it only further builds the scream that's building in her throat. Sometimes, just to keep everyone's spirits up after a grueling day of non-stop marching, Dorothea sings. She tries to keep it cheerful, but on days like this one, where they were all so tired and the rain felt like droplets of despair, the happiness feels like a knife rather than a balm. It's an old lullaby that her mother, blurry face with sharp, green pinpricks for eyes, used to sing to her when she was a child. It barely makes any sense, and in the past she would have rather shocked herself with lightning than sing it aloud to anyone, never mind the entire Imperial army. But today, she has other things on her mind. Petra sits next to her on the makeshift seat they'd set up in camp, dark eyes boring a hole into the side of her head. She listens to each high and low note in silence, but it still feels as though her thoughts are so loud that Dorothea can't help but look to the Brigid princess once she's done, searching for something that only Petra can give. "Your song was beautiful, Dorothea. It is reminding me of home," Petra says, and she feels warm all over. There is always room for compliments, that she is certain of, but there's something extra nice to receive one from Petra. "Aw, thanks, Petra. I've always said that I'm here to help you out with feeling homesick." She reaches out a hand to squeeze the one that rests on the warrior's thigh. Night or day, I'm here for you. Her hand on Petra's is just a small, friendly touch, and yet the way the warrior's coarse hands feel against her own strikes something inside of her, like an ancient gong being rung. All Dorothea wants to do is get closer and closer. It's a ridiculous thought, and when she catches Ferdinand watching them, and their joined hands, eyes clouded over with an emotion she can't recognize, she assumes it must look obscene, too. Petra is a princess, a queen. Yes, they were fighting for something that would change everything, but could they really expect to have the same pull outside of Fodland? Had Edelgard even looked that far ahead? Either way, the outcome was the same. Petra was royalty. She was an orphan, a songstress, and nobody all at once. They both had their roles to play. She tucks her hand back into her lap and excuses herself for the night. The confused look on Petra's face leaves her cold long after she wraps herself in her tense furs. An envoy of soldiers from Bridget arrives, and when one of the warriors, tall, muscular, and with a brilliant beard that's braided in the same intricate patterns that make up Petra's hair, picks Petra up and spins her around, Dorothea's insides go to war. That's her brother. Linhardt, seeming to sense her discomfort, offers. Can't you tell from the face? He has her nose. Dorothea doesn't wish to look much closer, but she's given very little choice in the end, when the man in particular comes up to her with his arm wrapped around Petra's shoulder and a fond grin spread on his features. He says something, which, after spending time with Petra for so many years, she recognizes to be Brijali. Whatever it is, it makes Petra blush so hard that she recoils and smacks him on the shoulder, that he laughs and bows his head in what might be an apology, or what might simply be an opportunity to hide his face. Dorothea schools her own expression into one of bemusement. She's been laughed at before, but she had at least known what was being said. Seemingly noticing her confusion, Petra nudges the man again and says, Please be having my apologies, Dorothea. Tikal will speak the Fodland language from now on. She repeats what she said to Tikal, this time in Brijali, and he nods enthusiastically to her. Very sorry, my lady, he says, his accent as strong as the way he carries himself, broad shoulders and rippling muscles. I mean no disrespect. I was commenting on your beauty. The way his and Petra's eyes meet after that sentence tells her how much of a lie that is. Still, this is an envoy of allies, and no matter how much she wants to put this silly boy in his place, she must behave. She smiles and holds out her hand for Tikal to kiss. How charming! Later, when the Bridget forces are settled in the middle of camp and are heartily sharing stories with one another, Linhardt comes up to her inside her tent with a frown. He was lying to you, Tikal. I know, Lynn. Her brush gets tangled in a knot that feels awfully like the one that's been sitting in her chest since the Bridget warrior's arrival. Nearly a year ago, she would have enjoyed the attention from someone who was so pleasing to look at, who reminded her with a mere glance of how honey tasted in porridge, delicious and sinful. Now, though, her heart has been locked up like a prisoner of war. But wait, if Linhardt knew that what he said was a lie, I didn't know you were studying Brigali. Well, what did he say then? To her utter fury, Linhardt raises his hands to his temple, looking far older than he had back when they'd been at the academy together, and shakes his head. You should ask Petra. Did you seriously come here just to tease and answer? Goddess, she needs a drink. You are both utterly exhausting, Linhardt groans, taking her own planned answer straight from her mouth. Just speak to her, and do try not to mess it up. Oh, she's definitely going to make sure extra salt goes into his food tomorrow. She does talk to Petra. Eventually. The day after the Bridget allies arrive is mostly made up of war council meetings. Petra translates a lot of the strategy with such speed that Dorothea can barely keep up, but she nods at all the right moments and takes the time to note everything down as best she can. Linhardt sits beside her, looking bored to death for the most of it, but fervently listening whenever Takal or Petra speaks in Brajali. She reminds herself that it was her own fault for not educating herself better, but can't exactly stop the bitter jab she feels when his eyes move over to hers. He isn't smug, that isn't Lynn's style, but Dorothea still has to restrain herself from kicking him under the table. It's after these meetings, and well into the evening, that she finally gets the chance to catch up to Petra. She looks right at home in the middle of all these Brigid warriors, laughing and standing that little bit taller as the fire crackles in front of them, and some of them bring out flutes and other instruments and begin to play. It's clearly a celebration, even if it's just between them and Petra. All of the warriors look at Petra with such loud, naked devotion that the tip of Dorothea's ears are scarlet when she forces herself in the middle before her nerves can get the better of her. "Petra!" She can feel their eyes on her. They must think she's unworthy to even be in their presence, never mind the Queen of Brigids. Well, at least that's something she can agree with. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if I could speak to you for a moment?" "Yes, let's. You are having my full attention." The way Petra says things with her whole weight behind her always manages to catch Dorothea's heart off guard. The way it races would be embarrassing if it weren't so pathetic. A string of cheers and brajali that bursts from some of the men makes Petra shake her head with a chuckle. But before Dorothea can ask what happened, Petra leads her away by the hand to the training grounds, a few feet away from the fire pit, close enough to be seen by her warriors, but far enough for privacy. Dorothea squints to the left and right. Nobody is around to disturb them, and she plans to talk quietly enough that she won't further embarrass herself in front of Petra's friends. "Again, sorry to disturb you, Petra. You did not." Petra's eyebrows furrow together like cute caterpillars. It's a look that makes Dorothea's tongue feel 3 sizes too big for her mouth. "Is everything being all right, Dorothea?" She rolls her eyes. "Why does everyone keep asking me that lately?" Then, because she knows her own frustration at wanting to be near Petra shouldn't seep into her tone, she sighs and cups her head. "Please, ignore me. I just wanted to ask you something about what Takal said yesterday." Petra's mouth moves, as though she's trying to form words, but can't actually get them out. Mostly, she looks disgruntled, and Dorothea can't tell whether it's because she's possibly been found out, or if Petra's upset that her concern for her was diminished so easily. Either way, her palms feel sweaty, and she can only pick at the cotton of her dress, mind racing at all the possibilities that are running through the Brigid Queen's head. "What Takal said." "Ah, I am understanding. You mean what he said about your beauty?" "Petra!" She laughs, but for some reason it feels like her eyes are stinging. "Oh, goddess, please don't cry, you idiot. I know that's not what he said." Petra's attempt to school her face from pure horror almost makes her laugh again. "I do not have understanding. I am certain that he commented on you being very beautiful. That's not what Linhardt said." "Linhardt? He must be making a mistake." For once, Petra's warmth doesn't meet her eyes. It sends ice straight into Dorothea's chest, and it remains, even as Petra's gaze takes on a desperate gleam, as if she's silently begging for Dorothea to drop the subject entirely. So she does. "Right, of course. How silly of me." She meets Petra's gaze head-on, and gives a sharp bark of a laugh that seems to bring the temperature around them down to a glacial degree. "Thanks for clearing that up, Petra. I really shouldn't rely on Lynn's translation skills, especially over you." Petra bites her lip, opens her mouth, and then closes it again with an audible gulping noise that reminds Dorothea of the sound nobles used to do whenever she asked them of their intentions with her. It's not fair, really, to compare Petra to them, but her mind feels like it's floating. Her eyes won't stop stinging, and it all feels so ridiculous. Despite only being feet away from one another, it feels like they are islands apart. Days later, Dorothea finds herself in Edelgard's private chambers, which is really just the biggest tent that the Imperial army owns. She's already had 2 goblets of wine, and Edelgard has already warned her to slow down. But she can't. If she stops, she'll have to think properly, and she is so sick of being proper and neat. She'd slaughtered people only a few hours ago, their blood slick beneath her boots. What is proper about that? Still, Edelgard's light eyes are on her. "Sometimes you worry me, Dorothea." Dorothea snorts in a way that distinctly reminds her of Manuela. "Adie, you've got a war to win. Surely you've got enough to think about than your silly friend." Edelgard drinks deeply from her goblet. Dorothea half wonders if this is just another way to prevent herself from answering. Ever the opportunist, she decides to cut through the silence herself. "I'm fine." And she is. She's not talked to Petra since they talked about to call, and she's okay with that. Really. The Emperor chuckles around the rim of her drink. It is completely devoid of humor, and it makes Dorothea want to throw her wine at her in protest. It's a tempting thought, but she assumes the treason she would be charged with, because Hubert would find a way, would severely dampen her already deteriorating mood. Dorothea picks at the hand around her drink. There's still dry dirt and goddess knows what on her skin. If Edelgard won't talk to her, won't treat her as anything but a friend that she's scared of breaking, then fine. She'll take up her time by tearing herself apart. "Dorothea, moping around isn't doing you any favors," Edelgard says, her voice as tender as the fresh red welts that Dorothea's left on her hand. "And truthfully, I'm disappointed in you. I thought you were much braver than this." There's a lot of things she could say to that, Dorothea realizes. A simple scream would do the trick, no doubt. But she already knows that people are afraid to say the wrong thing to her, no matter how hard she uses her smiles, her songs, and makeup like a mask. Even Petra, beautiful and kind, now hesitates in approaching her when their eyes meet across an empty room. Dorothea takes a deep drink from her 3rd cup and says, "Have you ever been in love, Adie?" Edelgard's narrowed glare tells her all she needs to know. "Once, maybe twice." "With a commoner?" She pokes at the Emperor, a silent delight at the way Edelgard's brow continues to knit with the effort of keeping her expression measured. "Or would that be too improper for your status?" "Are you aware of who you are speaking to?" Edelgard challenges, and it takes more than a few moments for Dorothea to push through the haze of the drink and realize the question is more to do with the war rather than her friend's pride. Edelgard calls someone to escort her back to her own tent after she's finished her 7th goblet of wine. Dorothea would have laughed at how damned silly it was for someone to walk her back to a tent that's only 20 feet away at most, but she feels so light, so empty and airless, that she just wants to dance the night away. 5 seconds later, and she attempts to do so in the limited space of Edelgard's tent. Edelgard looks torn between wanting to laugh at her antics and kicking her out right now, escort be damned. She does, however, stop dancing when the escort arrives, and Petra pokes her head into the tent. "Edelgard, you were needing me?" Edelgard turns around in her chair to address her, which means she doesn't get to see the fiery glare Dorothea throws her way. "Petra, yes, I am thinking you could escort our dear Dorothea back to her tent for the night, because, as you can see," Edelgard's brows furrow for the 8th time tonight. Dorothea's half worried that she'll stick like that if she isn't careful. "She's had a little too much fun with the wine." Dorothea rolls her eyes. If this was the Emperor getting back at her for her relentless prodding, then fine. That was just fine. She'd show her. She knew what she was getting into. And, more importantly, she was so brave. She has no idea what Edelgard was talking about. Or so she thinks for a stupid, besotted and drunken second, before she feels Petra gently take her hand and lead her out of the tent and into the night. "It's dark," she says, ignoring the way her stomach pinches together when Petra chuckles quietly and confirms that yes, it is dark, because it is nighttime, Dorothea. The dark had been her friend for a very long time when she was at the Middlefront Company. During her first few days there, she had locked herself away in a closet, going over her lines and testing her voice in solitude, so unused to having the eyes of beautiful women and handsome men on her that she had to have some time alone so she could concentrate. A small child, wanting nothing but to ascend to new heights, all she had to do was rip away the parts that didn't matter and make a show. Her fingers clutch onto Petra's, and she stops in her tracks, dragging the warrior to a pause with such force that the other woman actively looks surprised. "Dorothea?" She smiles and tilts her head down to stare at Petra's lean, muscular arms, her distinctive tattoos, and the golden flecks that reside in her eyes. She's avoided staying in Petra's presence for too long, fearful of saying the wrong thing, yes, but also because, if Petra looks even a little closer, she would see her, all of the disgusting and wretched parts that she's constantly tried to hide away. For Petra to see her like that, she would rather be skewered on the Savior King's lance. And yet, it doesn't stop her from reaching out to touch Petra's strong jaw with a hand. She inhales sharply at the shiver it sends through Petra's body, right down to the hand that still connects them. Her mind is screaming at her to stop, to control herself, to realize Petra doesn't want her. A grin, drunken and graceless, spreads on her face, and she leans in to press a sloppy kiss to Petra's cheek. When she pulls back, Petra's amused but soft glance shocks her heart enough for it to skip. "You are very drunk, Dorothea." "I love how you say my name." It isn't a lie. She's imagined Petra crying it out in her dreams, Dorothea's face between her thighs. A part of her wants to say that aloud, but even with how the world spins right now, there's a much louder part that is all too aware of how annoying she's being. If anyone was listening in, she already knows they think she's as silly and stupid as she often feels in Petra's presence. For now, she'll just tuck the memory of Petra's blush into her mind. A gift, something for a rainy day, or for her dreams to run wild with. There have been so many scenarios where it has done just that. Petra pulls her forward a little, her hands tender and her arms strong as she continues to guide her towards her tent. The night air is so cold against her body, but Petra's expression is so warm that even without the alcohol bubbling inside of her, Dorothea feels like her skin is on fire. You're so beautiful, Petra." She feels rather than hears the words. It's like the entirety of the Morphese ocean is rushing through her ears. The stars that sit in the night sky have decided to shine down on her, spotlighting her spectacle for nobody but her and Petra to see. She leans down, just shy of pressing her lips to Petra's, and digs her nose into the curve of the other woman's neck. Maybe it's the high of the alcohol, or maybe it's because she's been wanting since she felt Petra's hand in her own. But the distant scent of salt and grass hidden within the lines of brown flesh befuddles her mind. She wants, and wants so desperately that she feels like her lungs are going to collapse and her heart wither away. Then her stomach lurches, and Dorothea can distinctly remember pushing herself away from the Brigid Royal with such speed that she manages to retch up everything on Petra's shoes, and not her face. Bleary-eyed, trembling, and doing her utmost not to look up, Dorothea does the one thing she's always done in a situation like this: shut down. "Please, execute me," Dorothea pleads as Edelgard approaches her cot. Seconds later, she is joined by Hubert, who, thankfully, sports a cool and neutral expression, despite the obvious elephant in the room. "There's no need for dramatics, Dorothea," Edelgard sighs, but places a blissfully cool, plated hand on her forehead all the same. If she wasn't already madly infatuated with Petra, Dorothea wasn't quite convinced she wouldn't have fallen in love with her favorite emperor right there and then. Instead of getting deeper into that line of thinking, though, the songstress snuggles into the hand, and for the 5th time that day, tries to forget the stupidity of last night. It is a lot harder than even she would have thought. Dorothea's been many things in her life, but she's always known how to act when it comes to her betters, regardless of whether she really thought they were that or not. She knows that there is a line, an expectation of respectability. Be respectable, but don't let them walk over you. Be tough, but don't screw your chances of getting one over them. And be elegant, to the point that you can make them think you're one of them, even if you hate their guts. She doesn't quite know where "don't puke over their shoes" fits. A flicker of Petra's face, torn between disgust and goddess knows what else, makes Dorothea groan again. "Seriously, Adie? Oh, execute me for treason!" "I don't believe it was Lady Edelgard's shoes that you threw up on." "Hubert, please," Edelgard says at the same time as Dorothea whines, "Hubie!" a touch degree louder than she would have liked. "I apologize." And to his credit, Hubert's smile does, at least, look a touch more concerned than previously. "In spite of my teasing, I can assure you that the official story around the camp is that you have a stomach bug, and you'll be in your bed until you get better. I've also talked with Petra." He pauses at her visible wince. "And I can assure you that she's not as traumatized as you may imagine. On the contrary, she wanted to know how you fare, and whether she could visit you as soon as you feel well enough." "Tell me you said no." She will set herself on fire if she faces Petra so soon. She really will. "I said perhaps." She taps her fingers on her sheet-covered knees and gives a hum. It isn't quite what she's looking for, but it's good enough, particularly if it gives her room to think and plan how she's going to apologize, while also maintaining the shreds and tears that's left of her dignity. Petra is the kindest person she knows, but there's always a limit, isn't there? And if she hadn't thrown up on the royal last night, there was the whole kissing thing that had happened. No, she was being too kind. She had been everywhere in Petra's space and calling her beautiful, flirting and... Dorothea's hands fly up to her sweaty face. She had been just as bad as the knights that had pawed at her when she was at the academy, or the noble boys that had tried to slip their fingers up her dress during dates. She had tried to rearrange her thoughts, to make the comparison less damaging, but no matter how she looked at it, her own sins towards Petra felt unscalable. There was nothing else she could do. She needed to apologize. If Petra hated her, she'd understand. Perhaps she could be transferred somewhere else. She'd miss everyone, of course, but if that's what Petra wanted, and she most certainly did after last night, then what else could be done? She doesn't know how long she just sits there, head in her hands, and her knees drawn up to her chin, thinking and planning on what to do next. But when she eventually looks up, Hubert is gone, and only Edelgard remains, chin in hand, and her eyes tired. Dorothea can't look at it long. It makes her stomach hurt. "You must stop punishing yourself, Dorothea," Edelgard says suddenly, looking at her with a frown. "Adie." "No, I'm serious. You're the best of us." Dorothea laughs at that, but the way Edelgard glares at her makes her stop mid-chortle. "I know my war is taking its toll on you, and I wish there was a way to make it hurt less. But outside of outright exiling you and losing such a dear friend, I confess I have very few options." Edelgard's expression doesn't change, but she can see the slight shift of humor in her friend's eyes, the most subtle of twinkles. It makes her forget for a second that she's not the most mortifying person in the universe, lost instead in the safety of her best friend's presence. "I don't know the full extent of what's going on with you and Petra." "Nothing's going on." "But whatever it is," Edelgard continues, "I ask you both to get on with it. You'll never know what tomorrow will bring, and the time you thought you had can very suddenly run out before you've even realized what's happening. Take your chance, live your fullest, and fight for the things and people you love. The way Edelgard looks up and past her, twiddles her fingers slightly over a lock of hair. Dorothea has an inkling that speech wasn't just for her. And that is comforting. She's been so locked on herself and her feelings that she's failed to notice everything going on around her. It really isn't just her who is struggling in this camp, no matter how much her mind likes to twist itself so that it feels that way. Bernadetta hates the marching. Linhardt hasn't stopped complaining about the beds since the war started. Ferdinand's so restless about fighting former allies that it's rare for her to see him retire before midnight. And even Caspar, infallible to a fault, is throwing himself into the fires of hell to prove himself. And then there's Edelgard, Hubert, and, of course, Petra. She had been so wrapped up in her own disdain that she's been unable to see how low everyone else was. Dorothea reaches for Edelgard's hand, smiling when the Emperor accepts. "I'm sorry for getting so drunk last night." She's sorry for a lot of things, but again, she doubts apologizing for wanting to throw herself under the nearest horse would do anything to reassure her friend. So, she starts small. Edelgard's hand squeeze confirms it's worth it all the same. When Dorothea wakes up, the oil in the lamp by her cot is all but gone. She can vaguely see what's around her, but for the most part, all she can make out is shapes of things in the darkness. One such shape is curled up around the bottom of her bed, weighing her legs down. Flashbacks to men sneaking into her room at midnight at Mittelfranc immediately spring to mind, and she lets out a yelp, hand reaching for her comb to smack the assailant directly on the top of their head. The noise, as well as the assailant, makes the individual groan. Dorothea's blood turns to ice. "Petra?" Petra looks up at her through bleary, half-lidded eyes, her hand caressing the part of her head where Dorothea's comb had smacked against it. "Did you attack me? I am so sorry." Dorothea reaches forward to also add her hand to the soothing of Petra's head. She can't believe her luck, or rather, her complete lack of it. What would she do to Petra next? Stab her with a fork during dinner? "Really, I thought, well, I don't know what I thought, but I didn't know you were going to be here." It's so dark in here that she can't fully see the other woman's expression, but the way tingles go up and down her spine pulls her into action, and she swings her legs over the side of her bed to fiddle with the oil lamp. "Why are you here?" Dorothea's fingers catch on fiddly bits of the lamp, and oil spills on her fingers. She curses. "You were unwell, and I was wanting to check on you." A pause. "If I had known your bedside manner was so ferocious, I would have worn armor." Despite everything, the miles-wide gap that had separated them for so long, the insecurity that weighs her heart down, Dorothea is unable to stifle her snort. Petra's humor often left much to be desired. She blames Aloise for that. But when it hit, it was a perfect bullseye. The oil lamp splutters to life as she looks over her shoulders to see Petra, a pleased smile on her face. She's never looked more beautiful in the warm, orange glow, and the urge to walk over and kiss the grin off the warrior's face seizes Dorothea so forcefully that it takes a moment to realize she's not actually breathing, and inhales deeply to rectify it. Petra clears her throat, and while her smile is still there, Dorothea can practically feel the air get heavier around them. "I was also coming to talk to you, because I am thinking I owe you an apology." "Petra, you can't be serious!" Dorothea interrupts immediately. She doesn't even realize how high-pitched she's gone, until Petra winces. "If anything, I should be the one apologizing to you. I was in such a foolish state last night, and I was—" "Very drunk," Petra interrupts, though not unkindly. That's Petra for you. Kind, even to the girl who threw up all over her the night before. Dorothea is in love with an angel, and she is a vapid, selfish insect. Yes, very drunk. Dorothea takes a step closer, catches herself, and takes another step back with a sigh. But that wasn't the worst part. I was... Her eyes flutter to a close. She forces her next words out, a rusty fishing line pulling at her throat, until she has no choice but to speak, raw and ragged. I kissed you, and touched you, like you were just like you were a piece of meat, like you were mine, and you're not. You're so far from being that, and I still... Her nails dig into her palms. The pain keeps her from faltering. Still did that to you. And I am so sorry for that. You are such a dear friend to me, and... Dorothea, before you got here, I was thinking that if it's what you want, I can ask Adi to transfer me to somewhere else. Dorothea, please stop, Petra pleads. I am sorry for raising my voice, but please listen to me. I would very much like to be telling you what I've come to say sorry for. Petra lets out a breath, closes her eyes, and speaks. A few nights ago, you came to me in confidence to ask me what Tikal had said to you. I lied to you, and I knew you knew. But my heart became, what is the saying? Similar to a roarless lion. I could not say what I wanted, and it brought me great shame, yes. But the shame I felt at my own lies was nothing in comparison to me knowing I'd brought you pain. Petra clears her throat, her words wet and wanting. I have never wanted to hurt you, Dorothea, and it feels like a knife to the chest to know my lie has done just that. Tikal, he is my brother. If Dorothea's heart wasn't threatening to rip its way out of her chest already, she would have rolled her eyes at Linhardt being right once again. I tell him everything, which is why he is very forward with you. Petra swallowed. It is funny. I have always been so confident in letting people know what I want. But even now, my tongue feels so large in my mouth. You are such a wondrous person, Dorothea. Petra, I know. I am speaking now, and will not stop until my lie is truth. Dorothea doesn't think she'll ever forget how Petra looks at her, wholly and utterly full. My brother called you the future Queen of Brigid. He thought it was very funny to say so in front of you, knowing you could not understand because he is what is the word? A donkey's buttocks? Ass. Yes, that is being the word. Petra's smile looks so fragile and desperate. Dorothea clutches at the fluttery maroon silk that exposes her wrists, the only fragile tether that keeps her rooted to the spot. I didn't want you to feel pressured by my brother into wanting me, so I hid his words from you. It only succeeded in hurting you, and for that, I am asking you for your forgiveness. Petra finishes her plea with her hand on her heart, and a deep bow that makes Dorothea swallow heavily. There's so much to take from what Petra's saying, and if she was honest, she's still quite struck on the fact that Tikal had called her the future Queen of Brigid. The insanity of that statement sticks to her mind like a particularly persistent plate of jelly. Her silence must unnerve Petra, because she looks up from her bow and straightens, a sharp edge to her voice, born of desperation. You said that you kissed me like I was yours. Dorothea's heart clenches at how Petra's voice seems to taper off when she pronounces the word yours. I am. That is, I would like to be yours, and you mine, if that is what you want too. The Petra that stands in front of her, half smile on her face, and her hands curled behind her back to hide the way her fingers tremble, looks nothing like the Brigid warrior that had cut their enemies down a day ago. She is young, far too young for war, and deserves nothing but good and blissful things, and Dorothea realizes, heart in her throat now, that she wants to give them to her, even if she has nothing worth holding on to. For all of her fancy words and confidence that's been drilled into her time at Mittelfrank, Dorothea finds that she can only say one thing. Why? Why? I am not understanding the question. I've got nothing, Petra, she says, tearing away at the hope that had built in her chest at Petra's confession. She wants to believe she deserves it. She truly does. But time and experience has proven that the only thing she can offer is so minimal that surely anyone else would be better for Petra to direct her love towards. I'm not 30, Hubie, or 80. I've got nothing behind my name that could be worthy of your attention. That is far from being the truth, Petra interrupts, her frown obvious even in her words. But it is! Goddess, she doesn't understand herself. Petra has just this minute told her that her brother teases her for wanting her. Her, Dorothea, the foolish songstress. And the only thing she can think of is how droll that statement is. I have no money, no title, and the only legacy I have is with Mittelfrank, and God's Petra, that's... I don't know. Is that worth even a fraction of being seen next to you? Petra doesn't hesitate. Dorothea, you are enough. But do you think I am lying to you about my feelings? Petra says simply, her voice no longer betraying what she's feeling, but her narrowed eyes and the tilt of her head speaks volumes. It reminds Dorothea of how Edelgard looked at her before she told her to go follow her feelings. The comparison makes her smile, a soft, barely there twitch of the lips. She's doing it again, allowing her hateful mind to twist it against her. She shakes her head. No. She looks up and meets Petra's eyes. There's nothing in the Brigid warrior's gaze but affection. Had it always been there, and she simply hadn't looked hard enough? No, I believe you. It feels like she blinks once, twice, maybe thrice, and then Petra is suddenly very much in front of her. A respectable distance, really, maybe an arm's length away at most, but it's enough for her to reach out a hand to steady herself. Petra takes it as an invitation, and gently reaches out to fold their hands together. The warrior's thumb strokes across her hand, tender in the most rawest of ways. Dorothea's eyes stinging, and this time she allows herself to cry. I'm so embarrassing. Petra squeezes her hand and takes another step forward, tentative but confident. It is not embarrassing to feel as deeply as you do. It is something to be admired, and anyone who says otherwise, they will... becoming enemies of Brigid. Dorothea's face flushes at the half-sob, half-laugh that escapes her. The warmth that surrounds her is Petra, yes, but not just her body. Her love, her adoration, her heart. It is genuine, tangible, and she doesn't have to rip herself in two to get it. The thought sends another sob through her. Petra touches their foreheads together, and Dorothea, seized by something that feels awfully like love, wraps her arms around the shorter woman's waist and presses them flush together. It isn't a lustful embrace by any means, but finally being so close makes her feel as though she's walking fully clothed through the valley of torment, her skin scalding, and Petra's touch the only balm. She's still crying, can feel the tears slide down her cheeks, but she doesn't feel like running. Not this time. Dorothea? Petra isn't devout in the way of the goddess, but the way she speaks her name feels so much like a prayer that she clutches tighter to the warrior and commands her knees not to give out. It works. She still stands, and her forehead is slightly damp with sweat. I love the way you say my name, she says, and looks down, eyes wet and hopeful, to see Petra staring up at her with a grin. "I mean it. I do." I have heard this before somewhere. Gah, Petra is such a tease. "I promise to not throw up on you this time," she whispers, and laughs when Petra gives her an affectionate eye roll. Her insides twist and writhe at the memory, but she pushes them down. If Petra didn't want her, then she wouldn't be here, arms wrapped around her, a mischievous glint in her eyes. That was unfortunate, yes. Petra's nose skims her own. Her lips brush against her cheek. Dorothea follows the touch, inhales the scent of possibility that lingers on Petra's skin. But the night was not all bad. Petra leans back for a mere moment before capturing Dorothea's lips with a kiss. Dorothea has kissed many people before. Stupid men, old men, young men, and even men who she could have loved, if push came to shove. But none of them compared to how she felt now, fire and lightning crackling up her spine, desire pushing her deeper into the hot heat of Petra's mouth. "I can't... promise I won't lapse sometimes," Dorothea says between kisses, fingers in Petra's hair. "You're the Queen of Brigid, and I'm Dorothea, the one who reminds my heart of home." Petra interrupts, and with a searing kiss to her neck, wraps her hands around her thighs, and lifts her like she's nothing, drawing a gasp, and then a giggle from her throat. "Yes, well..." She's breathless, her mind half gone when Petra carries her back to her bed and lays her down like she's the most delicate instrument in the entire world. "Forget everything I just said. Kiss me." Petra does. Tikal greets them the morning after, his grin so large and so familiar to Petra that Dorothea really can't believe her stupidity at thinking he was anything but Petra's annoying younger brother. He nods at hers and Petra's clasped hands, and then bows low. "My queens." Dorothea can't stop the smile from appearing, even if she wanted to.